He slammed the door in my face when I had nowhere else to go, said I wasn't family anymore. But 6 months later, he stood in front of me, eyes bloodshot, voice shaking, begging for help. My name is Marina Whitmore, and I used to think losing everything was the worst thing that could happen to me. Turns out, watching the person who mocked your downfall fall even harder, that's worse. This is the story of how I lost my career, my home, and my pride, only to uncover the truth that could destroy his entire empire. Would you help the sibling who once left you out in the cold? Or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments, because what I chose to do changed everything. I didn't expect the marble to feel colder than the air outside, but standing there, just inside the front door of the house I used to call home, I could feel the chill climbing up through the soles of my boots, past the wet hem of my coat, straight into my spine. Garrett stood at the top of the staircase. Same stairs we used to race down on couch cushions, laughing until we hit the bottom or got caught. Now he looked down on me like a stranger, his tailored suit and stiff posture fitting perfectly into the new version of this place. The foyer gleamed with steel and glass. Gone were the worn oak floors, the family portraits, the warmth. Everything had been redesigned, modern, sharp, expensive. Everything except the silence between us. I need a place to stay, I said. My voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. Garrett tilted his head slightly like he was trying to remember if he'd ordered this confrontation. You've got to be kidding. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. It wasn't even full. Just a few clothes, my father's old watch, and a leather-bound notebook I used to carry for depositions. I had packed it out of habit. There was nothing else left. I'm not, I said. Just for a couple of weeks, until I figure things out. He descended 2 steps, slow and deliberate. You want to crash here, after everything? I nodded once. After you disappeared while Dad was dying, after you missed every doctor appointment, every late-night call, after the funeral, when you walked out like it was a board meeting that ran long. His voice remained even, but I could feel the years packed behind each word. I was working, I said, instantly regretting how flat it sounded. He laughed, sharp and humorless. Right, those high-stakes cases, right? Always too busy for this simple life you used to mock. I remembered the last conversation we had before Dad passed. Me on the phone outside a Manhattan courtroom, telling Garrett I'd try to make it home for the weekend. I didn't. Garrett, I said quietly, I know I was wrong. His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. I was arrogant. I thought success meant running farther, climbing higher. I never stopped to think what it would cost. I didn't come here to rehash the past. I just need a place to sleep, temporarily. And what makes you think I owe you that? I blinked. You don't. I'm not asking as someone you owe. I'm asking as your sister. A silence followed, long enough that I could hear the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen down the hall. The security guard, a man I didn't recognize, shifted his weight near the door, watching without watching. You're not my sister, Marina. Not anymore. Family shows up. Family stays. You didn't. I flinched but said nothing. My pride, already frayed, folded a little more. Garrett's voice dropped lower. I warned you about James, years ago. Told you something was off. You looked me in the eye and said I didn't understand your world. James. Even the name made my stomach tighten. The man I'd married. The man who had siphoned funds through shell companies under my nose. The man who'd smiled through courtrooms while my reputation disintegrated beside his. I was blind, I said, and stupid. Well, Garrett shrugged. At least we agree on something. I didn't have it in me to argue. He nodded to the guard. Please show her out. I turned before they could escort me. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. My boots clicked against the marble as I crossed the foyer. When I reached the front door, I glanced back once, just long enough to see Garrett adjust his sleeve, already moving on, already done. I stepped outside into the biting wind. The sky was a flat, lifeless gray. Slush soaked into the sides of my shoes as I made my way down the long front path. The estate gate buzzed open automatically. No one came after me. No one called out my name. I paused at the edge of the property, looking back just once more. Not for Garrett. For Dad. He would have let me in. Or maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would have said, "You reap what you sow, Marina." But he wouldn't have slammed the door. I stood there in the cold, fingers stiff around the suitcase handle, heart heavier than I wanted to admit. I had nowhere to go, no friends left who hadn't distanced themselves, no job, no money worth mentioning, only the memories of a house that no longer held me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity or desperation won out. I pulled it free. Unknown number. I hesitated. Then I answered. "Ms. Whitmore." The voice was clipped, official. "This is Agent Daniel Torres with the Financial Crimes Division. We're requesting a follow-up regarding your ex-husband's case. It's important." The last of my breath escaped in a cloud. I looked at the city skyline in the distance, lights already flickering on as the sun began to slip beneath the gray. "I'm available," I said. "Just tell me where." Sometimes life doesn't give you a door, just a sidewalk and a little bit of cold, and you keep walking anyway. A year ago, I had a wine fridge bigger than this motel bathroom. It had separate temperature zones, LED lighting, and made a soft humming sound I used to find soothing, like luxury breathing. Now I stared at a rust-stained sink, a cracked mirror, and a flickering overhead light that buzzed just enough to remind me I was very much awake. The motel off I-76 didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. The plastic curtains let in more wind than light, and the heater coughed like it was trying to clear its own throat. I curled up on the stiff bed, coat still on, and scrolled through job listings with a thumb that felt colder than my ambition. At least they took cash. I'd managed to withdraw the last $2,000 from my old joint account before it was officially frozen by the government. I folded the bills into the motel Bible, one of the few places I figured no thief would bother looking. Somehow, that felt like irony too thick to unpack. I tapped through a few legal firm websites. Most required resumes, background checks, referrals. My inbox already had 4 rejection emails, more polite than I deserved. One voicemail stood out from a former colleague at Lindell and Gray. "Hey, Marina. Just heard the news. I'm so sorry, Wam, but we're in a really delicate place right now with public image. Maybe once things settle..." Click. I stared at the ceiling. One of the tiles had water stains in the shape of Texas. That night, I ate a protein bar I found in the bottom of my bag and washed it down with vending machine coffee that tasted like hot cardboard. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. The mattress creaked every time I breathed. I kept thinking about Garrett, how easily he'd turn me away, but I couldn't even blame him. Not really. Not after what I'd become. The next morning, I took a long walk down Market Street, mostly to feel my feet again. The cold bit at my face, the kind of winter wind that slices through every layer. I passed office buildings where I used to have meetings, where my name was once whispered with both admiration and fear. Now I was just another bundled-up woman with a resume tucked in her bag and nowhere to be. I spotted her outside a coffee cart. "Jasmine?" I called, unsure if I wanted her to hear me. She turned, blinking through the steam rising from her paper cup. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and her coat looked like it had seen more than one Philadelphia winter. "Marina?" she said, eyebrows lifting. "Wow, you look different." I laughed, dry. Homeless chic. It's a trend. She didn't ask the obvious questions, just gestured to the bench nearby. "Coffee?" I nodded. We sat in silence for a moment. The bench was cold, but the coffee was warm, if slightly burnt. Better than the motel's version. "I heard about James," she said gently. "And the firm. I'm sorry." "Thanks." I stared at my hands. Turns out being married to a con man doesn't look great on a resume. You working now? Unless job hunting from a motel room counts, then no. She hesitated. I run a small legal aid clinic downtown. We're always short-staffed. It's not glamorous or well-paying. I used to scoff at legal aid, I admitted. Called it feel-good lawyering. Yeah, she said, not unkindly. You did. I took a sip. The coffee burned my tongue, but I didn't complain. I don't have options, Jasmine. She studied me for a moment. Good, because we don't have time for people who think they do. That afternoon, I walked into the clinic behind her, carrying nothing but the same bag I'd taken to Garrett's house. The place was cramped and chaotic. Phones rang off the hook. Files were stacked in leaning towers. The front desk assistant gave me a look that said, "New blood, huh?" I nodded slightly. Just here to help. Someone handed me a case file. Eviction notice. Elderly tenant. I skimmed it. My instincts kicked in, even through the fog of shame and fatigue. The woman's lease had a technical clause that might just give her a way out. I looked up and met Jasmine's eyes across the room. She gave me a small, tired smile. It wasn't the kind of place where you got assigned offices, just desks. Maybe a drawer if you were lucky. Mine was next to the shared coffee pot, the kind where someone always forgets to turn off the warmer. The smell reminded me of college, of long nights studying case law. It was bitter, but it was mine. I sat down and opened the file. Later that evening, back at the motel, I sank into the creaking bed with a strange mix of exhaustion and something else, something almost like peace. I didn't know what was coming next, but at least today, I'd done something that didn't involve defending someone who probably belonged in jail. I reached for my phone, ready to silence the next wave of rejection emails. Instead, a news alert popped up. Whitmore Builders faces zoning dispute, investor pressure after project delay. Garrett's face appeared in the thumbnail. Same suit, same confidence, same empire I once told him was a waste of our father's vision. I stared at the screen, heart pounding just a little harder than it should have. Well, maybe I wasn't the only one whose foundation was starting to crack. Your brother's name just came up in a fraud watch list, Agent Torres said without preamble. Sound familiar? I was standing in the cramped break room at the clinic, stirring powdered creamer into a mug of what loosely qualified as coffee. The plastic spoon paused mid-air. I blinked. Garrett? Garrett Whitmore, he confirmed. CEO of Whitmore Builders, flagged in a recent asset review tied to a suspicious offshore investment fund. It's preliminary, but, well, your name popped up too. Same last name. Same family business. I swallowed hard. He runs it now. I haven't touched anything since Dad passed. That's what we thought, he said, but you might want to keep an eye on him. I ended the call, feeling like someone had yanked the floor from under me. Garrett. Again. I used to joke that my stepbrother's greatest asset was his immunity to consequences. Now I wasn't so sure. I stared into the bitter brew in my cup, thinking of all the times he had called me Dad's mistake. I wondered what Dad would call him now. Back at my desk, the clinic buzzed with noise. Phones ringing, people shuffling papers, clients waiting with tired eyes and worn coats. But inside me, everything had gone still. I pushed through the rest of the day, nodding through intake meetings and zoning disputes, pretending my mind wasn't 2 neighborhoods away. It wasn't until I was back in my tiny studio, upstairs from a Chinese takeout that never seemed to close, that I let myself really sit with it. The room smelled faintly of sesame oil and old radiator heat. I sank into the secondhand armchair by the window and opened my laptop, typing Garrett's name into the search bar. His face appeared instantly. Press conferences, project launches, those slick promotional videos with him in a hard hat. But the newest article caught my eye. Whitmore Builders faces investor scrutiny over Cayman Link development. Investor scrutiny. It was always the investors. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the steady hum of traffic outside. Why did I care? I had every right to let Garrett drown in whatever mess he'd stepped into. He'd slammed a door in my face when I had nowhere else to go. He'd made it clear that we weren't family, not the kind that mattered. Still. I looked over at the photo I'd kept on the windowsill. Dad in his work boots, arms around both of us at a job site years ago. Garrett couldn't have been more than 10. I was 12, smiling like I owned the world. We had dirt on our jeans and sunburns on our cheeks. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe Jasmine was right when she said grief can trick you into mistaking memory for meaning. The next morning at the clinic, Jasmine slid a file onto my desk. Eviction case. Elderly tenant, no power. Landlords threatening to lock her out. Okay, I said, flipping it open, grateful for the distraction. She hesitated. Also, I saw the news about Garrett. I glanced up. You think I should reach out? I think if your father were here, he'd tell you to do what's right, not what's deserved. I sighed. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. No, she said gently, but sometimes they are. That night, after reviewing affidavits and emailing city housing officials, I sat on my bed with the phone in my lap. 1 ring, 2, voicemail. I cleared my throat. Garrett, it's Marina. I saw the news. Look, I'm not calling to gloat and I'm not asking for anything. I know how these things spiral. I've been there. If you need someone to help you navigate the legal fallout, quietly, I'm willing. Not for you. For Dad, I hung up before I could second guess it. No response came that night, or the next. By Thursday, I'd convinced myself that I'd overstepped. Again. That he probably deleted the voicemail without listening. That I had made peace with the silence between us. I was wrong. Friday night, just as I was locking the clinic door, my phone rang. Garrett. I let it ring twice before answering. Now you care? His voice was low, bitter. I braced myself. I'm not here to fight. You think I need you now? That I'm desperate enough to come crawling to the sister who disappeared for 10 years and then magically reappears when I hit a bump in the road? It's more than a bump, Garrett. You're not in my world anymore, Marina. You chose your path. Stick to it. And he hung up. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, staring at the dark sidewalk. Inside the clinic, the hallway light flickered. Outside, the street lamp buzzed above the stoop. I wasn't angry, just tired. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. Then I kicked off my shoes and opened my laptop again, not really sure why. Habit, maybe. I browsed through city filings, scanning permits, looking for... what exactly? The knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, no one was there, but a thick brown envelope sat on the mat. No label, no markings. Inside were copies of contracts, Whitmore Builders' recent development deals, the Cayman-linked investors, wiring schedules, highlighted lines, sticky notes, and one sheet handwritten in block letters. He's in deeper than he knows. You're the only one he might listen to. I stared at the papers, heart pounding. Something was wrong. And someone, whoever dropped this off, thought I might be the only one who could stop it. The news broke before dawn. I woke to my phone vibrating violently on the nightstand, buzzing against the wood like a wasp in a jar. The headline lit up the screen before I could blink twice. Whitmore Builders' flagship project goes up in flames overnight. Suspected arson. The photo was blurry. Smoke curling into the black sky, orange glow licking through the skeletal remains of what used to be Garrett's pride and joy. The flames didn't just take down a building. They burned through the last of his pride. I sat on the edge of my bed, bare feet on cold tile, still clutching the manila envelope from the night before. Pages were scattered across the small table where I'd spent hours cross-referencing contracts, tracing the same Cayman account numbers again and again. Whoever had left those documents wasn't bluffing. By the time I got to the site, the smell of smoke clung to everything. Ash settled like soft gray snow. Yellow tape danced in the morning breeze. Garrett stood beyond the barrier, face pale and tight, jaw clenched. I saw the footage, I said gently. He didn't turn to look at me. It was supposed to be our biggest project. I nodded, and it still might be. Just not the way you expected. He finally turned. His eyes were bloodshot. You think I brought this on myself? I think you trusted the wrong people. I think you weren't looking close enough. Garrett exhaled through his nose. You sound just like Dad. Good, I said, because he was the last person in our lives who cared more about people than profit. We stood there in silence, watching firefighters coil up their hoses, their boots crunching over blackened gravel. You were right, Garrett said quietly. I really screwed up. I didn't say I told you so. Instead, I walked back to my car, pulled the folder from the passenger seat, and handed it to him. This is what I found. The same investor names showed up in multiple shell companies, none of them properly vetted. The money trail leads back to Whitmore Builders, but I don't think you saw what they were doing. He flipped through the first few pages, expression unreadable. Why are you helping me? He asked. After everything? I shrugged. Because someone has to. Torres met us that afternoon in a cramped FBI field office, flipping through the same documents I'd annotated overnight. He looked impressed, which he tried not to show. You've uncovered more in 24 hours than our analysts did in 2 weeks, he muttered. Habit, I replied. Corporate law teaches you to spot things no one else wants to see. He laid his hands flat on the table. Look, what you found is big and dangerous. These aren't your average bad actors. It's an international laundering operation. You two are not safe. Garrett sat back, stunned. You think they burned my site? I think that was a warning, Torres said, and it won't be the last. An hour later, we were being driven to a cabin outside the city. FBI arranged protective custody. They didn't say witness protection, but it felt close. The kind of place with creaky floorboards and no cell signal. I'd always thought cabins were romantic. This one just felt necessary. Garrett walked the perimeter 3 times when we arrived, like he was trying to measure how far away from everything he'd become. I unpacked the stack of papers I'd brought with me and spread them across the dining table. That night, we worked in silence. He took one side of the table. I took the other. The only sound was the scratching of pens, the rustle of paper, and the occasional hiss of the old radiator. At one point, I got up to refill our mugs from the ancient kettle on the stove. Garrett looked up, eyes heavy. Remember when Dad made us sort invoices in his garage? He asked. We thought we were building an empire. Turns out we were just kids with highlighters. I smiled. He always said, if you want something to last, you build the foundation yourself. I didn't, he whispered. No, I said, sitting back down. But we still can. At midnight, a message arrived, a video file sent anonymously to Garrett's email. He clicked play. The footage was shaky, taken from a phone but unmistakable. His construction site, weeks before it burned. A man in a gray suit walking the perimeter. Then an explosion of light. The frame filled with fire. The screen went black. Garrett pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. He stood, silent, shaking. I reached out without thinking, placing a hand on his arm. They're not just after money, he said hoarsely. They want to erase me. No, I said steady. They want you scared, but you're not alone anymore. He looked down at me, and for a moment I saw not the CEO or the stubborn stepbrother, but the boy who once scraped his knees chasing me around a job site. I think I really screwed up, Marina, he said again, softer this time. You were right. I squeezed his arm. Then let's fix it. Together. We weren't just rebuilding his company. We were digging up every rotten piece buried beneath it. The floor of the cabin creaked beneath my feet as I moved between printouts, legal pads, and coffee-stained documents. Garrett had taken over the far side of the table, muttering to himself as he updated spreadsheets. The cabin felt less like a hiding place now and more like a war room. We'd barely slept. After the footage of his construction site engulfed in flames, Garrett stopped pretending this was just a misunderstanding. The man who once dismissed my warnings and mocked my fears now sat across from me with circles under his eyes and pen marks on his fingers. I scrubbed through hours of old footage, timestamp by timestamp, site by site. On the third pass, I found what I was looking for. "Pause it," I whispered to myself. There he was, Viktor Petrov, gray coat, dark scarf, hands in pockets, walking along the fence line of the Eastbrook site. 3 days before it had accidentally flooded and lost 2 weeks of work. He wasn't listed on any visitor log, no contractor badge. "Got you," I breathed. It wasn't just Eastbrook. He'd been at Northline before the fire and Greenfield before the materials theft. Each site, same pattern, always unannounced, always in the background. I flagged the clips, compiled them, and called Agent Torres. He answered on the second ring. "You said you wanted something concrete," I told him. "This is marble." The next 24 hours moved fast. Torres mobilized a team. Garrett compiled internal correspondence. I drafted a summary linking Petrov's visits to the laundering shell companies we'd traced earlier. Jasmine and the clinic team helped us format everything into a formal packet, ready for review. "You're really doing this," Jasmine said during a video call, smiling faintly. Corporate Marina Whitmore turned whistleblower. "Don't get too excited," I replied. "I'm still allergic to pro bono hours." But she laughed, and it felt good to hear it. Garrett, meanwhile, had called an emergency staff meeting, virtually, of course. Dozens of familiar faces appeared on the screen. Engineers, accountants, field managers, even the receptionist who used to sneak me gum as a kid. He looked nervous. "I won't pretend I didn't screw up," he began. "I ignored red flags. I let ambition cloud judgment. I lost track of what this company was supposed to stand for, what Dad built, what many of you helped build." A long pause followed. Garrett looked down, then back at the screen. "We're in trouble," he admitted. "Financially, reputationally, maybe legally. I understand if anyone wants to walk." The foreman, Leo, unmuted himself first. "You remember the week your dad hired me?" he said. "I didn't even have steel toe boots. He bought me a pair out of pocket and said, 'Let's build something that matters.' You lost your way, Garrett, but you didn't forget how to come back." Other voices chimed in. "If you're fighting," someone said, "we're staying. Pay us later. We'll make sure the skeleton crews don't collapse the active sites." Garrett didn't speak for several seconds. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. "Thank you," he finally said, voice cracking. We spent the next 2 days finalizing the FBI packet. My makeshift evidence board covered one full wall of the cabin, pages taped edge to edge like a conspiracy map. It was messy, but it told a story, one I had come to know intimately. And then Torres called. We got him. Viktor Petrov had been detained at Newark Airport, passport flagged mid-boarding. He'd tried to slip out on a flight to Lisbon. The moment his name hit the database, the system lit up like a Christmas tree. Even better, he was talking. That afternoon, the news broke. Whitmore siblings help FBI dismantle laundering network spanning East Coast. From disgrace to whistleblowers, Marina and Garrett Whitmore break silence. Builder legacy reclaimed through justice, not profits. I didn't flinch this time. Garrett didn't either. He sat beside me on the cabin couch, phone in hand, scrolling slowly through headline after headline. "We're not villains anymore," he murmured. "At least, not the only ones in the room." "No," I agreed, "but we're not done." He looked over at me. "What now?" "We survived, but what do we build from here?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I got up, walked over to the table and grabbed a thick folder I'd been sketching in for days, during breaks between calls, even during meals. Inside were blueprints, not for high-rise condos or luxury developments. These were smaller projects, modular housing, community gardens, childcare co-ops connected to residential blocks. Garrett opened the folder and flipped through the pages, slowly, carefully. "You really think this will work?" he asked. I think it's what should work, I said. It's what Dad would have wanted. It's what we forgot along the way. He looked down at one of the sketches. Whitmore Builders, repurposed as a mission-first development group. A place where profit followed purpose, not the other way around. We won't make as much, he said. We might make something better, I replied. He didn't answer, but he didn't close the folder either. Instead, he held it open, leaned back, and stared at the wall where our timeline of corruption had once hung. The pages were gone now, filed, delivered. The wall was blank again. Blank slate, he murmured. Blank foundation, I said, correcting him gently, and this time, we build it right. A year ago, I couldn't even look Garrett in the eye. Today, we cut the ribbon together. The stage wasn't much, just a wooden platform propped in front of the new housing complex in South Philadelphia, decorated with string lights and folding chairs. But the faces in the crowd made it grand. Families clutching keys, elderly tenants blinking back tears, toddlers running circles around the welcome table. Real people. Real change. Garrett stood beside me, hands clasped in front of him, tie slightly askew. On purpose, I think. Neither of us had worn a suit in months. It felt good not to hide behind pressed collars and boardroom polish. The ribbon stretched across the entry to the new Whitmore community residences, fluttering slightly in the spring breeze. Behind it stood a modest but beautiful building, 20 affordable housing units, a child care center, and a public garden space, and more importantly, hope. I stepped forward to the microphone, the crowd growing quiet. I used to think rebuilding meant starting over, I began, erasing everything and drawing fresh blueprints. But that's not how real rebuilding works. You don't tear down the past. You examine it. You learn from the cracks. You salvage what's still good. You pour a stronger foundation. I paused, letting the quiet settle. A year ago, I hit bottom. I lost my job, my reputation, my direction. But somewhere between the broken contracts and burned down buildings, I remembered what this name, Whitmore, used to mean. Not wealth, not prestige, but promise. There was a murmur of agreement from somewhere near the back. My father's last unfinished project was a free community center. He said it didn't matter if it turned a profit as long as it turned a corner for someone. Today, Garrett and I are proud to say, we finished what he started. The crowd clapped, soft at first, then louder. I stepped aside, motioning for Garrett. He looked at me briefly, then took the mic. I've made mistakes, he said, voice low but steady. Big ones. I let ambition blind me. I let pressure drive my decisions. And for too long, I pushed away the people who tried to pull me back. He glanced at me again. This company lost its way. I lost my way. And I want to thank the person who reminded me who I was raised to be, my sister, Marina. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. Garrett nodded toward the building. This project is just the beginning. We're not just laying bricks, we're laying trust, community, accountability. The crowd clapped again, this time fuller, more confident. After the ceremony, I walked into the old office, Dad's old office, now repainted and reorganized, but still lined with photos from decades of projects. Garrett had kept every blueprint, even the ones drawn by hand. One corner still had the cracked drafting table I used to crawl under as a kid. Our new sign hung outside the door. Whitmore and Whitmore, same last name, new meaning. Garrett stepped in behind me holding 2 mugs of coffee. No espresso machines, just plain drip. 1 cream, no sugar, he remembered. Jasmine says she's taking bets on which one of us cries first, he said, handing me my mug. I smirked. She always did love dramatics. She also asked me to remind you to take a real lunch this week. I laughed. She's never going to stop being my clinic boss, is she? Probably not. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out the window at the garden below. Volunteers were planting tomatoes and basil. Kids chalked drawings on the pavement. Garrett cleared his throat. I've been thinking. That's dangerous. I'm serious. He faced me. You saved this company. You saved me. I started to protest, but he raised a hand. Let me finish. You didn't come back because I asked. You came back because it was right. Because Dad would have wanted it. And somewhere along the way, I realized what he saw in you. I looked at him cautious, which was a partner. He held out a file, our incorporation paperwork amended just this morning. Full partnership, he said. Not because I need you, but because I finally see what he always saw. I took the file slowly. My name, Marina Whitmore, Chief Ethics Officer and co-principal, was printed below his. That's a lot of trust, I said quietly. That's the point, he replied. That's the foundation. We walked back out into the afternoon sun, the ribbon fluttering behind us, cut and folded neatly into a staff member's hands. Somewhere in the distance, someone was grilling hot dogs. Music played softly from a portable speaker. Nothing fancy, just real. Garrett pulled me aside before we reached the crowd again. Funny, he said. All those years I mocked you, called you cold, arrogant, Dad's favorite. I raised an eyebrow. And now? He shrugged, a little sheepish. Turns out the ones who mock you hardest are the ones who end up needing you most. I smiled. And if you're lucky? He met my eyes. They turn out to be family after all. There we stood under the soft spring sun, no longer adversaries but siblings, imperfect, mended, and rebuilding together. The ribbon had been cut, but what truly marked the day was the quiet look we exchanged, one of forgiveness and of faith renewed. Sometimes life doesn't give you clean slates. It hands you broken bricks, old blueprints, and asks if you're willing to try again. Family, I've learned, isn't about who never fails you. It's about who shows up when it matters most. And maybe, just maybe, redemption isn't earned in courtrooms or contracts, but in small steps back toward the people we once left behind. If this story brought something to your heart, whether a memory, a lesson, or a tear, I'd be honored to hear it. We've all built something out of ashes before. What did you learn from it?